Good evening and welcome to Christie's. I'm Charlie, specialist and auctioneer for Christie's Wine Department and also for the Cape Fine and Rare sale, which is happening on the 22nd of May in Stellenbosch. I'm here with Tim Atkin, Master of Wine, who is the world's foremost critic and expert on the wines of South Africa. And after a year that has impacted the South African wine industry like no other, we introduce you to the tenacious spirit and skill of the country's top winemakers. We are taking a sweep through a number of South Africa's top wines and deep diving into the opportunity that these wines present for collectors and enthusiasts across the world. These wines are available in the Cape Fine Rare Wine auction on the 22nd of May, and you can get your hands on them by registering as soon as possible at capefinerarewine.auction. So we're looking at, first of all, CHENIN Blanc. CHENIN Blanc is South Africa's top white wine. Tim, tell me about why CHENIN is exciting at the moment.
Well, I think it's entirely appropriate that we should start with CHENIN Blanc because it's the most planted grape variety in South Africa, and many people would argue it's actually the best, certainly the best white grape, maybe alongside Chardonnay, but I think it's the most South African in many ways. There's actually more Chenin Blanc planted in South Africa than there is in the Loire Valley, even though people think, oh, Vouvray, Montlouis, all these things, fantastic Chenin Blanc-based wines. South Africa really specialises in Chenin Blanc. And the great thing is it's grown in pretty much all the regions in South Africa, and it produces very distinctive styles, depending on things like altitude and soil type, proximity to the ocean, so very different styles of wine. The other thing about it is that a lot of South Africa's oldest vines are Chenin Blanc. Fantastic. Historically, Chenin Blanc was often used not only to make wine, but also to make brandy base. So it was kind of grown a bit of everywhere. South Africans drank a lot of brandy historically and still do to a certain degree. So it's planted pretty much everywhere, and about half of South Africa's old vines, 3,000 odd hectares of old vines, are Chenin Blanc. So it's got old vines on its side, it's got diversity, it's got complexity. I mean, it's an amazing wine, and it's, as I said, distinctively South African. And what we've got here is two very different styles of wine, right? From two very different producers, from probably the two most famous Chenin Blanc producing wine regions, one being Stellenbosch and the other being the Swartland.
Lovely.
Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me about this Swartland. This is the David and Nadia, which is available in the sale. And here we are with the 2014 vintage. David and Nadia, fantastic producer in the Swartland. Let's taste this and tell me about it, Tim.
Absolutely. Well, they're called David and Nadia Sardi. Nothing to do with Ibn Sardi. They're not related. And they are a couple. They met at Stellenbosch University. It's a bit of a love story in many ways. And they're really part of this new wave. I mean, they're alarmingly young. In his case, he's also alarmingly tall. I mean, I think he played second row for Stellenbosch University, literally did. And I think if you saw him coming towards you on a rugby pitch, you'd be quite scared. He's extremely tall.
Fantastic.
But he makes his wonderfully elegant wines that are very much soil-specific expressions of the Paardeberg. Their farm is where their base is called the Paarderbos, and they're on the Paardeberg, and most of their vines are quite close to the winery. Low intervention, small quantities of wine. I mean, some of these wines are made like in a single barrel or two barrel lots, very small, very collectible. And I think if you'd got onto these wines in 2014, I know this lot includes 14, 15 and 16, very different vintages, it would have been a smart move because these are going up in value. They're increasingly regarded, I think, as some of the best wine producers, particularly for Chenin, but also for Grenache and white and red blends in South Africa. So, I mean, a really delicious
Such concentrated wine. I mean, you can taste the barrel ferment. And I know the low intervention includes sort of low sulfur, which is very cool and collected by a lot of millennial sort of collectors across the world now. So this is a really, really exciting wine.
And I think the thing here is that we're not talking about new wood, we're talking about older wood and larger wood, and that's certainly a trend that we're seeing with a lot of people using 500 litres or not using wood at all sometimes for their Chenin. So this is all about fruit intensity and that French word terroir. I mean, the soils here are on shale on the Paardeberg, and there's a kind of grip to this. You often find that with shale and also with granite. That it's not like you can taste the soil, but almost you can taste the soil. There's a slight tension in the wine when you're tasting it. It's not particularly oaky. It's got lovely creaminess and texture to the wine, but it's that real focus. And it's slightly counterintuitive that you're talking about a hot climate area, the Swartland, and yet it's producing these wines with amazing freshness and minerality.
And acidity. It's absolutely lifted. And this wine, of course, is usually offered on allocation in the UK by Just Sereni and Brooks. And so finding old vintages like this at the Cape Fine and Rare Rare auction is really very exciting.
Yeah.
Moving south then to Stellenbosch, and this is De Morganson, and this is a really fantastic wine, again barrel ferment, but tell me about CHENIN in Stellenbosch.
Yeah, well, I mean, Stellenbosch is a fantastic area again for CHENIN. Stellenbosch is a big area. So we see this particularly with Cabernet Sauvignon, the different expressions of Cabernet Sauvignon, but also with CHENIN. It depends on where you are and how much ocean, particularly False Bay, influence you get on the vineyards and altitude and whether they're north, west, east, south facing. And the name of this vineyard is De Morganson. That means that it faces the morning sun.
Oh, wow.
And the sun obviously rises in the east. This is a really interesting vineyard. It was originally planted in the 70s and it's owned by Wendy and Hilton Applebaum, who live on the property. A large house right on top of the property and looks over this incredible sea of vines. Again, lots of different aspects and altitudes. And they talk about their vineyard being a sort of a vineyard garden.
Oh, wow.
So there's lots of kind of biodiversity going on. They certainly used to, and I think they still do, play classical music to their vines.
Oh, fantastic.
Certainly in
I wonder if you can
some of
taste
the
it.
past. I don't know whether you can taste that. This is a slightly richer style, maybe a little bit less mineral than the wine, than the David and Nadia wine that we have. The Stellenbosch wines often tend to be, depending on where you are, but tend to have a little bit more power to them,
absolutely.
maybe.
Huge concentration. Is that something to do with the old vine nature of it?
I think it might be. I think that certainly some of their CHENIN vineyards have been replanted, and they've even got. I mean, I think historically they were on bush vines. Now a lot of them are on trellises. Or even on Ischala, those sort of poles that you see in the Rhine Valley, where the vine is, the vine wants to do that anyway. All vines want to grow upwards, so that's why they grow in trees. And therefore they actually want to go upwards rather than along a wire, really.
Oh, fantastic.
And so, I mean, they've got a real range of sites, and they blend all these together to produce their CHENINs. I mean, they're one of the best CHENIN producers in Stellenbosch. I would say their reds are pretty good, but their whites are exceptional, particularly CHENIN and Chardonnay.
Well, you can really tell. I mean, that's really delicious wine. And of course, I remember 2 years ago in 2019 that the Divas, which is their other wine, did very well at the auction. And so we're hoping that this wine is going to do just as well on the 22nd of May. Get in there on the CHENINs, which are really very exciting. And we'll be moving to red wines next.
Fantastic.
Having talked about South Africa's most famous white wine, we are moving to South Africa's most famous red wine. Of course, it's Cabernet Sauvignon, and we have 3 fantastic bottles here, all from Stellenbosch, all from the Cabernet Collective, and all in the sale. Tim, tell me about Cabernet Sauvignon in South Africa right now.
I'm delighted to. It's obviously South Africa's most famous red grape. I mean, South Africa makes lots of good red wines out from other things, particularly Pinot Noir and Syrah, I would say, have got real potential, and Grenache. But I think that Cabernet is its most famous export, and these are the wines that command the highest prices. You know, they have a resale value, and it's partly based on the popularity, really, and the fame of Cabernet Sauvignon, which is to do with Bordeaux, the left bank of Bordeaux. Obviously, that Bordeaux left bank wines are collectible. The wines of the Napa Valley, also of the Maremma area in Italy, on the Tuscan coast. Cabernet wines are regarded by collectors as things they want to put in their cellars because they age extremely well, and that's definitely true here too. And we've got some fantastic vintages to choose from. So
absolutely. So 09 and 15 here, which are really delicious. And tell me about these vintages, because I think they're quite hot as vintages. Is that right?
Well, you tend to get hot vintages in South Africa as a rule, particularly in the summers. The key thing, really, in South Africa is how much water there is in the ground. And it's partly the drought during the growing season, but if you get a wet winter and the dams are full, then it's fine for irrigation and things like that. And in both of these vintages, so 2009, 2015, there was a substantial amount of water during the winter. And the droughts that came after 15 made things harder, really. So both of these vintages are comparatively well-balanced vintages. I would say maybe 09, very good for whites and reds, whereas 15 probably a little better just for reds than whites, but both exceptional collectible vintages, you know, up there with 97 and 99 and 03 really, and subsequently 2017. So
fantastic. And you get this freshness from the 15 vintages, is sort of this high acidity, which is especially in this area, the Jonkershoek.
The Jonkershoek is a really interesting area. This is the 15. This is from Neil Ellis, and Warren Ellis makes this. Jonkershoek is a very narrow valley within Stellenbosch, and it's very shaded. So you don't get a lot of late afternoon sun in a lot of the places unless you're really up above the tree line. So it tends to produce these quite chiseled styles of wine. That's the case here.
Absolutely.
So this is a 50, but very very much a Jonkershoek style. And there are not many producers in the Jonkershoek. You've got to pronounce it as well. Try and give it a go. Jonkershoek. I love the way you do that. But the Jonkershoek Valley, is not many producers, but the people who make wines there are really, really good. And this is a classic example of a Jonkershoek style.
A very collectible Cabernet.
Yeah.
And moving to Waterford, this is slightly further south towards the sea.
Yeah.
They're going to do a great chocolate tasting, I remember, from Waterford. And so hopefully this is a very chocolatey Cabernet.
Well, Waterford is one of the great places to visit. If you're out there as a tourist, not just in South Africa, you live in South Africa, it's a lovely destination to sit and have a glass of wine.
Absolutely.
This is in what we call the BORDEAUX Valley, so it's the BORDEAUX Road sometimes, which is one end, if you like, of the Helderberg. The Helderberg really separates the southern bit of Stellenbosch from False Bay, from the ocean on the other side. It's warm, but maybe not as warm as the site we're going to see, the Rustenbrede wine we're going to see in a minute. So I always think that Waterford make these very classic Helderberg wines. Helderberg wines are quite structured in a way, much more so than the Jonkershoek style, which was that lovely freshness and perfume. Maybe that's your Margaux style. Helderberg maybe be a bit more Pauillac. It's a slightly denser style. But I think Waterford make absolutely wonderful Cabernet Sauvignons.
Absolutely, it's delicious. And of course the Gem did very well in 2019 at the auction, so we're hoping that this bottle does just as well in the auction on the 22nd of May. The last one we have, and I believe this estate only do red wines.
Yes, they do.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I hope it's delicious.
Yeah, and Rustenbrede was originally set up by an ex-Springbok rugby player. Lots of Springbok rugby players around in the wine industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
They just seem to gravitate towards wine. But this is Rustenbrede. This is the central bit, really, of the Helderberg. A bit richer soils, denser, more powerful wines. Often a little bit more new oak, just a plusher style of wine. Again, I think this is showing just how well these wines have aged.
Absolutely.
We're talking wines that are over a decade old now, and they're not by any means at their peak. I think these are wines that will age for a bit longer. So if you're buying these wines for your own cellar, no problem with keeping them for a while longer. They might last, I would say, every bit as well as the 09 Bordeaux. Some of the 09 Bordeaux are aging quite rapidly, I think, and these have got really good structure.
Absolutely, it's delicious and quite technically made. I understand that there's sort of clonal selections, 6 different clones making this wine, so it's really delicious. Lovely talking about the ageability, because I think I might bid on them myself on the auction, but if I don't, you definitely should. So look out for these 3 wines from Cabernet Sauvignon.
Delicious.
Having talked about Cabernet Sauvignon, we are sticking with the grape variety, but this is a Bordeaux blend, a famous one from the estate of Glenelly. And Tim, you like Bordeaux blends because you gave it 100 points in the last year.
I did. The first time I ever gave 100 points to a South African wine was the 2015 Paul Sour, which is indeed a Bordeaux blend from Stellenbosch. So not made too far away from where this wine is produced.
And Glenelly, a fantastic estate, of course, with connections to Bordeaux because it's owned by the ex-owner of Pichon Lalonde.
It is the formidable May Eliane de Lonkesang, who I think is now 96 years old. The last time I saw her, which was a couple of years ago, she was still swimming every day in a pool. She was still flying around the world. She's amazing, bright as a button. Ex-nurse, she was a nurse during the war. Incredible human being, really.
Fantastic. And so we are now tasting the Cabernet Sauvignon, which is blended with Petit Verdot and Merlot. So let's have a taste and see what it's like.
It is. This is from their own estate, and 2010 was not the easiest vintage in the Cape. And I think what's important is if you've got your own vineyards, particularly if you've got a fairly extensive estate, and it's the Bordeaux principle, is you can blend. Basically, lots of selection, lots of blending. It's amazing how much influence, how much of a connection there is between Bordeaux and South Africa. Not just because the Bordelais like going there when they're winter, when there's a bit of sunshine. But, if you look at Pierre Lurton, who's working down there, Morkenster, Paul Pontellier, no longer with us sadly, but historically worked there at Plaisir de Mel. Michel Roland, of course, at Vergelegen. And then Hubert de Bois working at Wilka with Bruno Prat. So a lot of top Bordeaux winemakers have gone to South Africa, but May Eliane is the only woman woman I know of, and she's certainly, as I said, pretty formidable lady. I mean, she's really still on the case, still redesigning the winery. I mean, incredible, 2 years ago, they sort of completely reconfigured the cellar, and she's got this amazing glass collection, antique glass, and she decided, I don't want that here, I want to move it over there, so she moved everything around.
I love it.
Yeah, I love it.
So charming.
I hope I'm like that fundamentally. I'm unlikely to survive that long, but you never know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Michael Broadbent did.
Michael Broadbent did, yeah. It was booze.
Yeah.
It was a good one, good claret.
Yeah, well,
See,
like
good Bordeaux blends keep you going.
Well, this is really delicious, and it has that age-worthy thing about it. It's really sort of plush, delicious Bordeaux.
I mean, the last time I was there, I mean, she did a vertical tasting of both of this wine for me, with Luc, her winemaker, but also of Pichon Lalande, Pichon Comtesse as it's sometimes known. And it was amazing how well these wines had aged. I mean, some of the Pichons are going back to the 1920s. I mean, obviously this wasn't around then. But, this is pretty classy. It really is very smart. And it's on a slope, and it's east-facing, again. So a lot of the vineyard is east-facing. So again, you're getting those slightly cooler afternoons.
Oh, great. Hence the restraint.
Hence the restraint in the wine.
I love it, fantastic. A wine to lay down, so sign up in the sale now and purchase this one on the 22nd of May and lay it down in your cellar.
Absolutely, and think of May Eliane.
Perfect. Next up is two fantastic wines. One of them is a Cabernet Sauvignon dominated wine, and the other one is pure Cabernet Franc. They're both from 2011, and the Cabernet Sauvignon is from Le Riche. So tell me about them, because they are master blenders, I think, is that right?
They are really. I mean, Etienne Le Riche and now his son Christo, who's taken over from him, although I believe that Etienne was making the wine at this time, was the long-term winemaker at Rustenburg. And he then set up on his own, king of Cabernet Sauvignon in many ways, but also the king of Stellenbosch. And he's blending three areas here, so Wraithby, Firgrove and the Jonkershoek Valley. Tendency towards sort of cooler sources within Stellenbosch, but Stellenbosch is a big area, and he's blending throughout the region, picking the best bits really to make something that's really age-worthy.
Absolutely.
This is 2011, which was a drought vintage, lots of those in South Africa these days, but it was also quite a cool vintage. So really nice acidity in the wines. They're wines, I think, that are aging very, very gracefully. So pure Cabernet Sauvignon, pretty much, I think, but a pan-Stellenbosch blend. Beautifully done.
Fantastic.
That's why I keep using it.
And because they're picking a bit earlier and because of the drought, that's the thing that...
Yeah, partly that, but also I think he's very much focused on these cooler areas, particularly Firgrove and the Jonkershoek Valley. To get freshness and I think ageability. Getting ripeness in South Africa is not your problem. It's a warm Mediterranean climate with variations within it. But getting elegance and freshness is where the skill really comes in of the blender, I would say.
Well, he's found it here. This is really delicious. So the 2011, look out for it in the auction. Sticking with 2011, this is Rats.
Yes.
I love this name, and it's Cabernet Franc, which is a fantastic grape variety. And he only makes one red wine. So
he does, Brouwer Rats. Well, he does make another red wine, which is Emar de Compostela, which is semi under his name really, which is a Bordeaux blend.
Yeah.
But under his own label, Rats, this is the wine, Cabernet Franc. He makes a variety of Cabernet Francs. This is interesting in that it's mostly from vineyards in the Polka-Dry Hills where he's based, but in those days, 2011, he was also using 20% from the Simonsberg. So again, this is something of a pan, I'll use it again, Stellenbosch blend with that wonderful Cabernet Franc. Cabernet Franc is a blending grape, and most people regard it as a sort of lesser grape in many ways to Cabernet Sauvignon, but it's not. It's actually older than Cabernet Sauvignon. It's a parent of Cabernet Sauvignon, and at its best, it's absolutely brilliant. And we're seeing the emergence now in South Africa, increasingly, of standalone Cabernet Francs. They're really big, probably about 50 of them now. I mean, they started off with 3 or 4 or 5, and suddenly it's a whole movement. Absolutely. And Brouwer is really driving that Cabernet Franc movement. Again, 2011 vintage, freshness, balance, not overwooded, elegance and longevity, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fantastic. It's in that sort of herbal Loire style, which I really love. I think it's really fun, and it's definitely a sort of braai wine. Bring that out on a Sunday afternoon with a big hunk of meat.
Fantastic, and I do think it will age.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So look out for these in the auction, both 2011, the Le Riche and the Rats. I'm really excited about these two wines. These are hidden gems in the auction catalogue. And one of them is the Sonnenblume 1980, one of the oldest wines in the catalogue. And the other is the Tolima. This is the 1994 Cabernet Sauvignon. So tell me about Tolima. This is the winery that famously has a minty sort of Cabernet Sauvignon style.
It does have one wine called The Mint,
The Mint.
Although I think that block has now been pulled out. So I think the Mint is no longer the Mint, or will no longer be the Mint. But you know, people sometimes say it has a slightly minty style to Tolima. One of the great names really on the Simonsberg, family owned by the Webb family, Giles Webb, fantastic winemaker.
Yep.
Good golfer too.
Fantastic.
Much better than I am. So is his son.
And this is the 94, so quite an old vintage here.
Yeah, and 94, historic vintage. I mean, 94 was the year of the democratic elections coming back to South Africa after Mandela had been released. And really it's kind of the pivot between, you know, older South Africa and new South Africa in inverted commas. So I think this is kind of a historic vintage for all sorts of reasons, really. But Tolima were already making very good wines. They're not really part of the new wave. But they're part of the new old wave. Could we say that?
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. That's a great term. And it's sort of an old claret style here. You get a bit of that Game Blood style wine, which I really think is intriguing.
Absolutely. I like Game Blood. I'm loving your work.
Yeah.
You must be doing the MW exam.
Yeah, right. You know, so this is fantastic. And then we're moving to a much older wine here. This is from Sonnenblume, and it's the 1980s. So tell me about Sonnenblume, which means sunflower.
It's sunflower. I mean, one of the great classic names. And if you're looking for aged South African wines, you know, Chateau Libertas and Sonnenblume, there are wines where there are not considerable amounts of them, but significant amounts, I would say. And you can find these old wines on auction markets. A lot of them have been preserved and cellared by Distel. This is really interesting. Cabernet Sauvignon from 1980, and it's a coastal wine, which, you know, hilariously coastal in some ways applies to some areas which are not particularly close to the oceans. But this is a blend of mostly wine from Paarl, Cabernet from Paarl, and about 20% or so from Stellenbosch, I think probably from the old Overgouw vineyards. So this is a classic. You know, it really is, and I think it's quite interesting looking at these wines. In those days, people were often making wines that were picked earlier, much lighter and with lower alcohol. That was really the style in those days. If you look at something like 1961 Chateau Lafite, it had about 11.5% alcohol. So, you know, a lot of those old clarets and old South African wines are much lighter in style. It's incredible the way they've hung on in there, though.
Absolutely, it's delicious. I double decanted this wine earlier and couldn't resist taking a little bit from the decanter. It's really delicious. And funny you should talk about 61 because in 47, Sonnenblume was served to the royal family when they visited South Africa. So I think it has this sort of royal pedigree, which is quite interesting.
That's why I love you, because you know things like that.
That's why you come to Christmas, right? Someone in a velvet suit. So these wines are really fun. Look out for the hidden gems in the catalogue and the sale on the 22nd of May. Wrapping up with a really fascinating wine, which unfortunately we don't have here because there's only one bottle of it, and it's the 1821 Grand Constance. So we're lucky in the auction to be having this bottle. It's the year Napoleon died, and it was Napoleon's favourite wine, so how exciting is that? It definitely classifies as a unicorn wine. What's your feelings about the wine being on offer at this auction, Tim?
Oh, I mean, what a treat to have it there. But I think there are only probably a dozen bottles of this wine in the world, maybe fewer, I don't know. I've never tasted it, I'm sorry to say. I have tasted Madeiras that old, but listening to people I respect who have tasted it, it's still fresh, it's still lively, and it's still really exciting. And as you said, it's historic. I mean, imagine tasting a wine that was on its way almost to Napoleon. I mean, I couldn't believe the figures of how much Constantia wine Napoleon shipped to St. Helena. Maybe there's not much to do on St. Helena, apart from hold your ulcer or whatever. But between 1815 and 1821, I looked this up, 297 gallons of Constantia wine, and that is 1,126 litres. I mean, that's a lot of wine.
Fantastic. He
must have popped from drinking Constantia wine. But what a way to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, amazing wine. Yeah. I think what's interesting about this wine, A, is obviously historic, but B, is we don't really know what was in it, the grape varieties. I mean, who knows? It could have been, I think from what people have said, it's got that red colour, could be red muscadelle, could be a bit of Pontac, as the grape variety was known, probably not Muscat de Frontignan, which is what subsequently a lot of these Constantia wines were made from. So historic wine, really exciting, and a link with Napoleon. What more could you ask for? Really?
Absolutely, and it's bicentenary year, 200 years later, to be on offer on the 22nd of May is really exciting.
And he died
the same
May
year.
the 5th.
It really all fits. So I look forward to bringing the hammer down on that. The low estimate is only £4,000, and so that's really good value in comparison to some Madeiras from the same age. I really think you should take a look at this bottle and register to bid, as I said, 22nd of May.
And it's been recorked.
Yes,
it's been wonderfully recorked. So
definitely look at
perfect.
We are delighted to answer some pre-submitted questions, both Tim and I. Hopefully they're mostly about wine, but most questions are about shipping. And the big question, how do you ship the wines? It's very easy in South Africa. They have a great system whereby they collate all the wines together and then send them across the world to the UK, the US, Singapore, Malibu, wherever you are. And it's £100 for 6, excluding VAT and duty. So that's the question on shipping. We're moving on to a wonderful question now about what we would bid on in the sale. And if they're only choosing one lot, that's a bit cruel, isn't it? We're both hedonists, but
so many things I want to try.
Yeah, absolutely. What would be your lot, Tim?
I bid for the Old Vine Project lot, just because I'm particularly fascinated and impressed by what they've done, really, with focusing attention on South Africa's old vines. The oldest vineyard, I think, in South Africa goes back to 1893,
wow,
which is the Footpad vineyard where I've been. Amazing. So that's what I go with, the Old Vine Project.
Fantastic.
Case is, I think.
Even Sardi's wine in there, which was 2 years ago, the highest price for any wine was the Columella. And I think this time it's the Chenin in that.
No, I think there's a Soldat in there.
Soldat.
Yeah,
exactly.
Grenache. Really nice.
Fantastic. Yeah. And for me, well, I'm Mr. Bubbles. I love champagne, and I love Cap Classique, which is South Africa's answer to champagne. And from Le Lude, which is the fantastic producer, and they're doing a rosé, which is the 2012 version. So I would get that. I would drown myself in it. Question for you, Tim.
We might drown you.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I'm speaking on the rostrum. The question for you, Tim, is what does South Africa need to do to get to the next stage of collectability?
It's actually putting wines in people's hands, I think. I mean, South Africa's problem is an image problem in many ways, that probably about half of what it exports is in bulk. So people have an image of South Africa as being cheap and cheerful, good value. And I think events like this, and also some of the praise that's been given to some of the top wines in the country from international critics and also from those at home, is just helping to raise the image. People just need to realise that South Africa has an amazing range of terroir and makes some fantastic wines across lots of different styles. It's not going to happen overnight, but little by little by little, this fine wine snowball starts to gather pace and size.
Absolutely. So it's a combination of you offering more 100-point wines and the capefinerarewine offering delicious
Not only
wines.
me. No.
Absolutely. But no, that's really the reason. Premiumization, and the capefinerarewine is offering the best of the best. So sign up now. Another question here about the Grand Constance 1821, and it's talking about the recorking. What's the significance of recorking wine like that?
Well, interesting, that having watched the video of this happening, the original cork, and I assume it was the original cork, was actually pretty short.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, amazingly that the wine has survived so brilliantly. And watching that video was quite scary. You think, oh God, what happens if the neck breaks or the cork collapses or something like that?
Yeah.
And it was very skillfully done, but it's now got a more solid cork in there. It's got a new wax seal. It's been done with real expertise. So anybody looking to keep it for another 200 years, or we won't be around to see it, I think you're in safe hands.
Absolutely. Recorking, of course, quite common in the auction market, tends to happen a lot with Bordeaux wines such as Lafite, Latour, if you send them back. So it's a really fantastic thing. We don't have time today to answer everyone's questions, but we will respond individually. If you have any questions, please send them to Sune, that's S-U-N-E, at capefinerarewine.auction. We look forward to seeing you in Stellenbosch on the 22nd of May. Hopefully you'll all be watching me take the sale. You'll be registered to bid, and you can take advantage of all of the wonderful wines in this catalogue. I know you will be, Tim. See you there.
I will. Sadly, I can't be there in person.
No,
I'm missing South Africa. Anyway, but I know you're going to have fun.
Absolutely. And you haven't seen my suit yet. You have to tune in just to see this.
I'll be there.
Very
I'm going to
ferocious
watch your suit.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for tuning in. And we look forward to seeing you on the 22nd of May.